understand to be service desk, and then after that it says SSA. Do you know what that represents?
Well, SD I understood to be the service desk. The SSA, I don't know, Secret Service Agent?
I take it.
I don't know.
I take it you weren't being serious about that, Mr. Baker.
No, I'm sorry.
That's all right. And then at tab 19, you, as I understand it, reply and set out another decision with regard to not reinstating. Is that right?
Yes. Understating wherever possible the gravity of the wrongs for which he is disfellowshipped.
And are to understand that by this time he had moved on to St. George, is that right?
Yes. That's about the time that I exit the scene. But I do recall St. George contacting me. And once again there was what appears to be an untruth made.
Yes, and at tab 20 there seems to be, I think, a reference from that.
In the third paragraph down?
That's a letter that you weren't party to, of course. It was from St. George to Mariba, is that right?
Yes.
But it says that in fourth paragraph, in talking to Brother Monty Baker from Beanley, he mentioned that they too felt that his conduct of late met with their approval, and they were contemplating a favourable recommendation too. Now, what is your response to that?
I question who the he is. It says, in talking to Brother Baker from Beanley, he mentioned that they too felt that his conduct of late was meeting with his approval. Now, who mentioned that? Me? Or was it BCH's talking to me?
Well, I suggest, Mr. Baker, on the ordinary reading of it, it would be a reference to you. But what are you saying in relation to that you did not mention that position? In other words, you did not say that it met with the approval of Beanley.
I seem to recall having a phone call. Oh, it's so far back now. And I might have said something along the lines, he's showing all the outward signs. But I think I do put a caveat on it. In earlier letters, saying, you know, we still have this nagging doubt in our minds. He vehemently denied until recently that he interfered with his daughters.
So are you saying you don't recall ever reaching a position where you were supportive of or accepting of a reinstatement?
Yes, this is in the letter dated 14th of the 3rd, 92. It said, in our last meeting before he left for St. George, we were right to the point of recommending that he is ready, due to his showing outwardly all the correct manifestations of repentance, along with a strong desire to be part of the organisation. It says, we did, however, have just one matter that we wanted to follow up before we would make a recommendation to you. In this matter, we wanted to clarify with you. From your reply, it appears that BHA is still untruthful and still withholding information, and appears to be understating wherever possible the gravity of the reasons that he was disfellowshipped. Are you still there?
Yes, we are, Mr. Baker. Do you not see us?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Can you see and hear us?
Apparently not, Your Honour. Can you see or hear us yet, Mr. Baker?
Have we lost the connection?
We just have a couple of minutes adjournment.
Or do we need to adjourn to do it? Or can you not just do it? Just read out.
It's gonna be gone.
He probably has his phone off.
Hello, Karen. Yeah, okay. How do you think I'm going?
Just cut the sound.
Good. You still can't hear us, is that right?
You might do it on the telephone with your honour's leave.
Yeah, we could do that. Is there much more to go?
No, you're right. It's just about done. So if you can just wrap it up in a couple of minutes.
Thanks.
Bring him back and do it on the telephone.
There as well, though, isn't he?
You should be.
May as well fix it. I think it's just too simple, isn't it? Yeah, I know. All right.
Sorry for it. I wouldn't like to be left being really gone.
Have we rung him back?
I did brief him, rather I just told him to wait.
Maybe he's taking.
You still may not be able to.
No, Your Honour, apparently the video link will be re-established within 2 minutes, I'm told. My experience is always wishful thinking with technology, but if we do it on the telephone, then it won't be recorded. If Your Honour wishes to adjourn briefly, we're obviously in Your Honour's hands. But
Yes, I was just waiting.
It's 40 minutes travel away.
If you hold the telephone, why won't it be recorded?
I don't know, Your Honour.
lost it altogether. Not much point at the moment, we've lost it altogether.
Hello.
I'm looking for Mr. Baker.
Wrong number.
Thank you.
No, there is nada. How did it?
No, here she is.
Sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Baker, it's Mr. Stewart here. Are you now hearing us? Are you hearing us on the video yet?
No,
All right, we'll put,
I was about to back up.
all right.
Oh, here it's appeared now. Yes. Yes.
Okay, it's going to be C. It just won't be in the video. I think there's an issue on there or anything like that. But at least you can hear it. I can talk.
Can you hear me, Mr. Baker?
Can't hear anything though.
Mr. Baker, can you hear us?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, you in the hearing again, Mr. Baker. We've lost video, I'm told, but we do have audio. We can hear you.
We have a small video.
We do have a small video of you, so we can see you. Do you not see us?
Yes, clearly.
Oh, well, there you go. Good. We'll take up where we were, Mr. Baker. Now, in your paragraph 5C of your statement, you say that at the above mentioned elders meeting, so I understand that that was the meeting that you remembered at that time to discuss reinstatement.
Yes.
It was revealed by the protagonists that he was expelled from the Mariba congregation for his abusing his two daughters. At the meeting, my only input was to ask about the welfare of his two daughters. In view of the statement that the mother of his daughters was aware of the wrongdoing at the time of the abuse, this would unlikely make her a fit person to care for them. And you go on a little bit about that. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are you suggesting that the welfare of the two daughters was your principal concern throughout the reinstatement issues that you dealt with over a period of time?
Well, being truthful at the time, I don't know if you've ever felt personally that you regret not having followed through on a matter. I'm sure we've all done that. And on this occasion, I regret not having followed through. The answer to my question at that time was, what about the daughters?
Looking back now, is there anything else you might have done differently in your involvement in the matter, Mr. Baker?
Well, in the light of what I know now, of course, in hindsight, I would have followed through to inquire about the welfare of the daughters. In fact, I'm sure any elder would do so.
Is there any way in which you think that the Jehovah's Witnesses' response to child sexual abuse can or should be improved?
Well, at that time, yes, but I understand there have been a number of improvements since. I've not seen them. As I said, I've taken great efforts to try and erase my memory from anything associated with the witnesses.
From what you knew of the process at that time, is there any particular criticism or weakness that you would identify for improvement?
Well, I'm sure there's been a number of things, not necessarily with this case, but a number of things further questions come to your mind, and there are occasions to express your opinions to travelling overseas and so forth. But that's way above my pay scale.
Right, thank you, Mr. Baker. Those are my questions, although it may be that there are others who wish to ask you questions. Thank you, Ron.
Does anyone have any questions?
Just one brief question. Mr. Baker, it's Ms. David here. I represent BCG.
Yes.
Not sure which way I'm looking, but anyway. Just very briefly, you were asked about the things that you might do to change the Jehovah's Witness system.
I think just keep looking at your screen.
Right, thank you. Would you agree that one important thing to do that in the reinstatement process, that the victim must have a voice in that reinstatement process?
Without a doubt.
Thank you.
Without a doubt.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Baker, as you know, my name is Ms. McGlinchey and I represent you in these proceedings.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Baker, you've given some evidence about your recollection of the two attempts or the two approaches that BCH made to your committee making a plea for reinstatement, and as you recall it, he was rejected on both of those occasions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you know that after at a time later than that, he was actually reinstated to the church?
No. I think I'd made my exit before then. When you mentioned it to me at this hearing, at this commission, I was flabbergasted.
Are you saying that you not only didn't hear about it while you were at the church, but that surprises you now to hear that?
Even today.
Are you able to say why?
Well, it's the obvious, as I've mentioned, the obfuscation, the diminishing of the wrongdoing, and it just seems, I just find it unfathomable that he would be allowed back in.
All right.
And I believe it's so soon, 2 years.
Do you recall ever telling BCH that his chances of getting reinstated would be better or improved if he moved to a different location?
Yes.
You recall saying that to him?
Yes, well, at the time he was seen by witnesses to be making overtures to a woman in the congregation who was a reproved witness, and he would have made it hard for her, and I believe he did make contact with her and her children. So I recommended to him that he should really get out of the country if he really wanted to be reinstated, because that was probably an exaggeration, that he shouldn't have been anywhere near her.
Mm-hmm. So when you told BCH that, just to be clear, it wasn't an effort to perhaps suggest to go somewhere where people didn't know about his history of sexually abusing his children?
Oh no, that wasn't the reason. Right. He was so persistent for reinstatement. And I just told him the chances where he was were not good.
Right. I just want to ask you some questions about your knowledge of allegations of sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness Church. You said in your statement at paragraph 3, and you don't need to go to it, I'll read it to you, this was not endemic within the Jehovah's Witnesses Church as it is in some institutions. Now, you were referring to allegations of sexual abuse when you put that in your statement. Was that correct?
Yes.
All right. Since making your statement, you have heard the opening to this hearing from counsel assisting, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you recall that he said words to the effect that documents handed to the Commission from the Jehovah's Witness Church included 1006 files relating to allegations of child sexual abuse. Do you recall that?
Yes.
What was your reaction to that?
That statement was made over a period from 1950 until today.
Yes, correct.
1,065. So that works out at about 15 a year, my calculations.
All right.
But I was still flabbergasted, and I still question the data gathering for that information. Right. Were they cases that were actually proven, or were they just reported cases? I just find it so hard to believe.
All right. When you were still in the church, was it a matter that you heard discussed as you moved around the congregations about the child sexual abuse was an issue or a problem? Did you ever hear that discussed?
No. Now, this is the first occasion that I've come across in all the years that I was serving in the congregation.
So the first case you came across was the matter of BCB?
I think I remotely knew of one in New Zealand, but I had nothing to do with it then.
All right.
I happened to be working in the Bethel at the time in New Zealand.
And you didn't have any knowledge that perhaps the church hierarchy or anybody in the hierarchy may have been handling allegations of child sexual abuse?
I seem to recall it was reported in a newspaper in New Zealand.
Yes.
I'm afraid I cannot recall, but that was such a remote case in some village somewhere, from what I remember. Right. I'm quite sure that this is the first I've ever come across it personally.
Mr. Baker, you expressed surprise that the Jehovah's Witnesses had this number of files because you say you hadn't personally come across the problem. The conclusion, which appears to be available, is that the people who did know didn't talk, and certainly didn't talk to you about what the church's history might be.
Obviously.
And I would assume, but you might be able to confirm for me, that the church would have been embarrassed if knowledge had got out about allegations of this type in any number being made against members of the church.
Well, yes, their reputation for cleanness in the congregation is one of the assets of the church. In fact, that's what attracts a lot of people to the organisation, is their reputation for their cleanness and their upholding of righteous principles. Now, for that information to come out, that would have damaged the asset, as it were. So I would imagine it would have been embarrassing for them to bring it out. And I still question the credibility of the data.
Well, it's just the files. It's the church's files. That's what it is.
I understand, Your Honour.
Just one other matter. Mr. Baker, in hearing the evidence of BCB and also in your discussion with her, you heard about her experience and the trauma she experienced, BCG, right? The trauma she experienced by going through the process of having to make her allegations and be judged by 3 men. You're aware that that's her evidence, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
All right. As I understand it, elders are always men. Is that the case?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. In your understanding of the church and the scriptures that underpin the workings of the church, do you see any possibility of women becoming elders in the church?
No. It's a scriptural principle. This in no way diminishes the role of women in the organisation, but a scriptural principle is held to. The mores of society change over a period of time, and I feel it was only in the last 10 years that we had a woman premier in Queensland. The society is changing all the time, but I don't think the truth of the Bible will ever change. And as a result, I know that Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only ones that hold to this, women who are not to be elders. There are very capable women who assist other women in the congregation. But
But not as elders, is that correct?
No.
And not as teachers?
They can be teachers in the sense that the Bible refers to them as a great army of preachers who are working for God. And they're teaching people Bible studies. In fact, they carry the bulk of the work.
But they can't actually teach in Kingdom Hall? Is that correct?
They do have discussions with each other, but they don't teach from the podium.
All right. And when they have discussions with each other, that is other women, they're required to wear a headscarf, is that correct?
No.
Head covering?
No.
I see.
No, they're only required to wear a head covering if they happen to be a small group and there was another unbaptised male there, and obviously the only one who could conduct the meeting would be a mature sister, and on that occasion she would acknowledge her subjection by wearing a head covering.
Right. Thank you,
I
Mr.
say subjection, not subjugation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Baker. I don't have anything further. Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Baker, you appear to still have significant knowledge of the scriptures and the teachings of the Bible. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I wouldn't say that. I just listened to some of those brothers and they're making their statements, and they were way ahead of me. But on that aspect, I still actually read the Bible often. But when I said I was trying to erase any memories, it was to do with the church.
Can you just help me with this then? And I appreciate that for the church and maybe for you too, that the Bible is the divine word of God.
Yes, it exerts power, yes.
But is there ever a discussion about that word having been expressed in the social context and mores of its time? Yes, of course. At the time it was written. That's right, and expresses the society as it was then. Is that ever talked about?
Of course. Just in earlier conversations you felt that when the brothers brought up the matter of 2 witnesses from Deuteronomy 19:15, you put it in context and say, yes, the result was a death penalty. But in actual fact, in Matthew 18 and verse 6, Jesus also made the comment about if a matter is not resolved with 2 witnesses, then the wrongdoer is considered as a man of the nations, which is the same as disfellowshipping.
But what I'm seeking to understand is whether let me go back a step. You appreciate that one of the very significant issues for the Royal Commission in this case study is the way the Church responds to allegations of sexual abuse. And we will have to make findings and recommendations in relation to the way the Church does respond to those allegations. Do you understand?
Yes.
And do you understand that for many people, the fact that women are excluded from a process of adjudication in relation to the allegation of sexual abuse is a significant issue and a problem?
Well, I know, while I've never been in this case before, I know in other cases where the parents have been present at the time of questioning.
That's a different issue. At the moment, I'm just looking at the question of the people who determine the truth of the allegation, which is the elders. Do you understand?
Yes. Yes.
Now, and as you know and rightly point out, in our society, although by no means perfected, but nevertheless the role of women has changed and changed significantly since probably World War II, but maybe back to World War I. Do you understand?
Yes, I fully understand.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of the mores of society have changed in other areas too.
Well, that may be so, but when we look at the role of women in our community, it has changed and is in the process of continuing change. Do you understand?
Oh, I fully understand, and I can see problems coming up in the future in certain areas. Because...
Well, just stay with me for a second. If it's the case that one may look at the Bible as reflecting the mores in the context, social context of its time, is there room for a discussion now about whether or not the insistence upon elders being confined to men should change?
I can't see that. The primary reason is because there was a direct edict from Paul to the Ephesians, I think it was, where each one has a role in the congregation, and the responsibility comes upon the males. And in society in that day, it would not have even been thought unusual. In fact, they would have thought of it unusual when those with the gifts of the Spirit, gifts of prophecy, stood up and they were women in the congregation. Now, that would have seemed so much out of place to them. But today, it's the other way around.
Well, maybe it's not an opportunity for us to take the discussion too much further, but there are a number of churches, of course, which have come to understand the biblical injunctions in the context of the 20th and 21st century, haven't they?
Yes.
And those churches have, in fact, in some cases, made bishops of women.
Oh, of course, I see that. Catholic Church seems to be holding up at this stage, but for how much longer we don't know. But on the other side of the coin, you have to remember that while Jehovah's Witnesses may seem out of step with society's thinking, there have been other occasions. For example, in 1974, if you were caught evidence of using tobacco, you were disfellowshipped by the congregation. Now, in those days, people thought, wow, Jehovah's Witnesses are really harsh, cruel people, disfellowshipping for someone for using tobacco. And yet, by today's standards, they would be applauded for having such standards.
Well, finally, on this topic, do you think that the process that you engaged in seeking to identify the truth of the allegation of a young lady in relation to her allegation of sexual assault, do you think that process would have benefited if one of you in the adjudicating panel had been a woman?
I think it would have taken the heat off the situation. I can imagine how intimidating it would be for a young girl. In fact, I've seen it, where a young girl has to come before 3 elders, and I'm sure they would have done everything they could to put her at ease, and they would have, I know on my own occasion I used to say a little joke just to try and put everything at ease. But I do believe and I've seen situations where sisters have been present as well to supply the moral support, and it has worked out for the better.
But would it be a better process if a woman was engaged in actually making the decision, was one of the adjudicators? At least one of the adjudicators.
I don't want to get involved in the gender battle, but I would assume that if that was the case, the women would still use the same scriptures as what the men would use.
It's not a question of using the scriptures, it's a question of the tribunal, the constitution of the tribunal that has to be confronted by a young woman to tell her story of intimate sexual assault.
Mm.
Do you think it's appropriate that tribunal just only ever be comprised of 3 men?
My way of thinking, and my wife is not a witness of 20 years, she would agree with what you say. And of course, you know I've been indoctrinated to my beliefs, but I would say what you say is a fairly fair decision, a recommendation.
Yes. Does anyone have any questions on those matters?
No, Your Honour.
Mr. Stewart?
Your Honour, that's all for Mr. Baker. And
Mr. Baker, thank you for your evidence. You are now formally excused.
tomorrow morning, Your
Thank
Honour,
you.
I would plan to start with Mr. Penchef, also via video to Brisbane.
Very well, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, Dr. Jason Morrison, theologist again. I just want to say thank you for watching the videos, and I hope you got plenty of self-rediscovery and freedom out of it. If you watched it on YouTube, please share or like, maybe even comment. If you watched it on Facebook, like, comment, share. But most of all, get out and live. This isn't a rehearsal. You've got a one-off life. Don't let your loyalty and your faithfulness blind you to the life that you should be experiencing. Till the next video, thank you for watching, and bye for now.